All right, so it's been a long time since I've done a video about one of my favorite mods of all time, Chivalry 2, the Sicilian Vespers. So I figured it was about time I did another video about it because when I did my when I did my review of this mod, of this classic mod for Medieval 2, about a year ago or so, I then re-uploaded the mod and I made an install guide, which of course still applies today. However, for some reason, the links I put up no longer work anymore. But a user by the name of Lord Lemos or Lucas Lemos has re-uploaded the mod to ModDB. So you can find links to it in the description below. And I figured now would be a good time as any to discuss Chivalry 2 again on the channel because, you know, stainless steel has always been the most popular mod in terms of historical mods for a Medieval 2. So, you know, it's always been Broken Crescent, stainless steel, Tsardoms, mods like that have you know, taken the spotlight. But Chivalry 2, back in the day, Chivalry 2 is what really brought me back into Medieval 2 because, like I said, in my previous video, which was my Medieval 1 Total War retrospective, I talked about how when Medieval 2 came out and it didn't have Medieval 1's era campaigns and a lot of the aspects were not present in Medieval 2 that had been in Medieval 1, including the aesthetic and things like that, and some of the mechanics. I was disappointed in Medieval 2. But when this mod came out, I came back to Medieval 2 and I played a lot. I made a lot of AARs back in the day on Total War Center based on this mod. And so Chivalry 2 is essentially a successor to Chivalry 1 from Rome Total War, the medieval era mod for Rome Total War that I've talked about a bunch on the channel. And you can see this mod, it keeps the vanilla map, which I always found to be a decent map for the medieval period. Because, you know, with the limitations of the engine, I always figured that including lands east of the Caspian was a little bit tough. Like a stainless steel, I always felt lacked kind of that detail in Europe and the Middle East that it needed. Even though it did extend, it did have an excellent map. It does have an excellent map. I always felt like the vanilla map was a little bit better. It was good. It was a good map. I always felt it covered a lot of ground. And this mod adds a ton of factions, a ton of era campaigns. So just going over the era campaigns, there are several. Medieval 1, of course, has early, high, and late era. And Sicilian Vespers, Chivalry 2, has a 5 era. So Dark Age starts in 888, the Heirs of Charlemagne campaign. The early era starts in 1080, standard. Stupor Mundi starts in 1212 AD, the High Era campaign, with, of course, the fractured Byzantine Empire. And the Renaissance campaign starts in 1401. And then, of course, under Grand Campaign, the Grand Campaign is actually the late era campaign in Chivalry 2, the Sicilian Vespers. And you can see there are a whole bunch of new factions in this mod. So not only does this mod add that Medieval 1 kind of era campaign sort of thing and expand upon it, which is what I feel Medieval 2 should have done. Like take the same mechanics from Medieval 1, the era campaigns and other things, and expand upon it rather than, you know, not have those things at all. Right, so you've got England, the Papal States. Well, the Papal States are not playable. Kingdom of France, Of course, this is late era. So you've got the Golden Horde, the Holy Roman Empire, and then one of my favorite things is that in the factions change as you switch eras. So you have the Angevins, the Kingdom of Naples in the late era campaign, but of course they are the County of Anjou in the early era campaign, right? And of course, borders change as well. The Byzantines are in a much worse position now, of course, in the late era campaign, even worse in the Renaissance campaign. The Crusader states are, of course, in a horrible position in the late era campaign. It's just the Kingdom of Cyprus left over of the Crusader states. You've got the Ottomans, of course, in the late era campaign 1311, and you have the Ottomans as well in the Renaissance campaign. You have the Ilkhanate in the late era campaign, which is pretty cool. There aren't too many mods that have playable the playable Ilkhanate, so that's cool to see. You've got the Kingdom of the Vlachs and Bulgarians. You've got the Principality of Akaya. So, of course, in the high era campaign, you actually have the Latin Empire. I can show off some of these things, of course. So, of course, like I said, my first ever campaign was Medieval 1 High Era Byzantines, right? So, one of my favorite aspects of that is, of course, you don't have Constantinople, right? So, actually, Chivalry 2 does take historical accuracy seriously, right? So, you can see here, in Medieval 1, you started out with Nikaya, with Lesser Armenia, and with Georgia, which of course didn't make any sense for the Byzantine Empire because, of course, you know, the Byzantines fractured into three main kingdoms, empires, when Constantinople was taken by the Crusaders in 1204. So there was the Nicaean Empire, there was the Empire of Trebizond, and there was the Despotate of Epirus. So actually, Chivalry 2, it historicizes that, right? So you actually start out with Trebizond, Nicaea, and Epirus, rather than, you know, having Georgia and Kilikia under Byzantine control, which doesn't make sense, of course. And of course, here, like I said, you have the Angevins in Anjou here for the high era campaign. Because I've loaded up the late era campaign and copied those files, that's why it still shows up as Regnum Neapolis here, so don't worry about that. All the details about the launcher are in my install guide and review, which I will put in the cards here and in the description. And of course, the Bulgarians are actually playable in all three era campaigns. Armenia is also playable in all three main era campaigns, as well as the Dark Ages, and in the Renaissance, you have a playable Kingdom of Georgia. So actually, let's start a little campaign here. Let's go for Kingdom of Naples, because I like the Kingdom of Naples, or we could do the Bulgarians. Well, how about we do Bulgarians? Yeah, let's do that. And of course, this is just, I'm just going to showcase some of the cool parts of this mod. So of course, in the launcher, when you choose which particular era campaign you want to play, it copies the files for that era campaign, right? So that's how it changes, you know, the campaign map, the units that are recruitable, the factions as well. Like I said, you have Armenia in Dark Ages, early, high, and late era, and then you have Georgia in Renaissance era, for example. For the Bulgarians, you have the Tema Paristrion in the early era, and then you have Tsardom of Bulgaria in the high era, and the Kingdom of the Bulgarians and Vlachs in the late era, like we have here in 1311 AD. And you can see this mod utilizes a lot of Medieval 1 assets. A lot of these assets, of course, carry over from Chivalry, Total War, the original for Rome 1. So, for example, we have a lot of new buildings, for example, Encastellation, right, which is a separate building from the Citadel, the castle buildings. And it gives you certain public order bonuses, public population growth hits, right, depending on which province you're in, right? And then this mod also changes a lot of the aspects of the economy management. So actually, it's really tough to play as a smaller faction here, like the Bulgarians, for example. There are tougher factions. Let me showcase the campaign map here. Spoiler alert. So this is the late era campaign. I don't believe I showcased this too much in my review. I showed more of I showed the Dark Ages, I showed the early era, and I showed the Renaissance era, but I didn't show the late era very much. So you can see Bulgaria and the Vlachs, they start out with one province here, Tarnovo. And the Serbs start out with a couple of provinces here, which is actually a better start than they have in the high and early eras, that's for sure. High and early era Serbia, that's a tough start. Poland actually only starts with 3 provinces. Denmark has 3 provinces at the start. So actually, the smaller factions in Chivalry 2, they have a very tough go of it, right? So the economy management is pretty tough for them. So you can see the Angevins in the late era. Yeah, it's the Kingdom of Naples, as well as Marseille here under their control. So yeah, that's one of the more fun factions because it really transforms a lot from the early to high to late era campaigns and Renaissance as well. Aragon is one of the factions added in Chivalry 2. Portugal, of course, has a more historical start position in Chivalry 2. Chivalry 2 definitely adheres more to historical accuracy than the vanilla game, that's for sure. That was one of my major gripes with the vanilla game. The Latin Empire, which of course is a playable faction in the high era. In the late era, since there's the Paleologan restoration of the Byzantine Empire, right? They took back Constantinople. So of course in the late era, the Latin Empire is no more. So you just have the Principality of Akaya, right? As a playable faction, fully playable. And that's pretty cool to see. And of course, you know, in the early era campaign, when you look at these provinces here, there are a lot of new provinces added in Chivalry 2, and a lot of them are these island provinces here, like like Corfu, Lesbos, and Euboea, right, Negroponte, and Crete. And of course, in the early era, you might think that these provinces make the Byzantines a little overpowered, right? Especially, however, you know, the Byzantines should be powerful in the early era, in any case. But in the late era, you can see that these provinces are extremely important for historically accurate start positions, because of course Venice starts out with Euboea and Crete, right? But then you have Genoa in control of Lesbos and Kaffa, of course. And you also have the Angevins, the Kingdom of Naples, in control of Corfu, right? And because of these new provinces here that are added in Chivalry 2, you can really have more detailed, historically accurate start positions in the late era. So that's really cool. And, you know, I actually think Chivalry 2 has a pretty cool division of provinces. It's not too what do I want to say? Too dense, right? I actually think it's pretty good in terms of density. There are more cities, more castles to fight for. I think that makes it a little more interesting. Of course, the vanilla game had it was much less dense, especially in the Near East, which I think made the Near East less interesting. Of course, less targets for crusades. Less fighting going on here in the East. It's less economically powerful, right? In Sicily having 3 provinces, I think, is a good choice here. Southern Italy having a couple of provinces added here, I think that's very important because, of course, it becomes a battleground for the Angevins, for the Byzantines, for the Kingdom of Sicily, for the Serbians, Hungarians. It's just a very good, I think, dispersal of provinces here. But what else do I want to say about Chivalry 2 that I haven't said in my review? The combat. So combat, actually, in Chivalry 2 is very similar to the combat system in Chivalry 1. Right, so actually let's get into a battle here somewhere. And let's see. Yeah, let's just get into a fight with the Byzantines. It doesn't matter if I win or not. The important thing is just to get into a battle. But this leads me into talking about one of the other aspects of Chivalry 2, and that's the Garrison Script. So one of the things that makes it really difficult for smaller factions is the fact that Chivalry 2 has a pretty aggressive Garrison Script. Now, here's the thing. Medieval 2's campaign AI is not very good about garrisoning its cities, right? So actually, you'll kind of walk over the AI. You'll take over a lot of cities pretty quickly, right? So actually, I actually appreciate the Garrison Script because it does not, I don't think it makes the AI overpowered. Of course, the Garrison Script mainly works, it only works for the AI, right? And that has its downsides, of course. It can be annoying for the player, but you just have to learn how to work around it, right? You have to gather enough forces. You can't just siege with a couple units and storm a giant city, right? You have to actually muster enough forces, like to take and then occupy a major city. And I think that's a good thing, actually. You just have to plan things out a little more than you would have to in vanilla Medieval 2. And, it's not like the AI gets amazing units. It mostly gets levy troops. Of course, one of the things about Chivalry 1 is that there were a lot of levy-type forces. So levy watchmen, levy peasant spearmen. And those guys were basically next to useless. They were mainly just for filling out forces if you don't have anything else available. And they were also kind of for garrisoning, right? Just garrisoning your provinces, right? So actually, let me start fighting these guys. But the combat system in Chivalry 2 is, there's a big focus on heavy cavalry, of course, because, heavy cavalry was just extremely important in this time period, right? So it's impossible not to have them be that important. We are defeating these Byzantine cavalrymen, it seems. Of course, we have our heavy cavalry fighting them, and we kind of flank them a little bit. But now they're flanking me. I don't know if we're going to be able to win this. But you can see every faction has a unique unit roster, and the units look pretty good. They're not, I wouldn't say they look as good as, something like Stainless Steel's units. Of course, I'm going to be covering stainless steel a little bit more on the channel later, because, you know, I actually never really played it that much. Back in the day, I was a Chivalry 2 kind of guy. I always enjoyed it quite a bit. I was busy with Chivalry 2. I didn't really have much time to play stainless steel, even though stainless steel was, of course, more popular than this mod. Though this mod was popular back in the day. Did I just lose my general? But in any case, this mod is very much, as you can see, my army basically routed here. And I have to say, you know, Chivalry 1 placed an extreme emphasis on morale shocks, right? So melee battles, they would cause casualties, right? It's not like they don't cause any casualties, like, I don't know, early versions of EB2, right, where melee casualties are extremely few and far between. But there is kind of a balance here, and morale shocks are extremely important in Chivalry 2, and I find that to be one of the most endearing parts of the combat system. And of course, this combat system is kind of similar not only to Chivalry 1, but also to the combat system in Empire Realism, Napoleon Realism by Jam, and Rome 2 Realism as well. Those mods are more focused on fatigue and morale shocks, right? And I think as you just saw this battle here, when I lost my general, my whole center collapsed there. And, you know, that's one of the aspects of the Chivalry 2 campaign that I feel like a lot of other mods don't really do. They don't really take that approach. And I always liked this approach. That's why I always enjoyed Chivalry 1. And Empire Realism, which is another mod I haven't talked about yet on the channel. Noble Death. But as you can see, the units, they are pretty vanilla inspired, even the new units. The levy type units as well. So actually, I didn't show my Bulgarian medium cavalry here, the Pronayars. So the units look decent, especially the horses. I believe it utilizes the realistic horses mod, if I'm not mistaken. But the units look decent, but because they're not, it's not the most detailed game, it doesn't push the engine too hard. And thus you don't have performance issues, right? So you don't actually really need the large address aware patch for this to play this mod, whereas you need that to play mods like EV2 and stainless steel and the ship submod for stainless steel and probably Tsardoms as well, heavier mods like that. So that's another aspect that I really appreciate about this mod, is that it's better on performance. Yeah, the economy is more like the economy in Chivalry 1. It's tougher to manage. It's really tough to play as a smaller faction, right? So like the Bulgarians and Blacks, like I just showed you here. But, you know, the thing is, there are so many new factions in Chivalry 2, and there are so many. Let me actually showcase a couple other things. Oh, did I just die? Yeah, I lost all my faction family members. But so let's go for the Principality of Akaya, for example. Now, there are some factions that just have a really tough start position, like the County of Anjou, I would say, in the early era campaign and high era, if I'm not mistaken. You just start out with one province and then you're surrounded by a couple of major factions. So really interesting start position. You've got just Corinth here as the Principality of Akaya and some, you know, medium Frankish cavalry and just your family members and some basic archers and spearmen. And then you're surrounded by, you know, a Sicilian controlled colony, Venetian-controlled colony, some rebel territory, and then, the Byzantine province of Morea there. So actually, action like this, it's a really interesting start position. And, it's because Chivalry 2 has kept the vanilla map here. It allows for really interesting start positions for major factions like the Principality of Akaya here. And actually, let me showcase, even though, like if you take a look at the economy here, not good at all. Not good. So if you don't take a couple of provinces here, and again, it's really tough because of the Garrison Script. Like you've got to, like if you attack the Byzantines, you not only have to face down these troops, kind of a basic garrison here, but you also have a bunch of levies to attack. So you have to, be smart about your tactics. You can still beat down those levy armies with smaller forces because, again, with medium cavalry, you can do those morale shocks and get a chain rout pretty easily, even against a bigger levy force like that. But, there are even tougher factions like Serbia in the high era and early era. In the late era, Armenia has a really tough start position. Let me just show off that start position here. And of course, when you change the era and the faction kind of changes its character, of course, like, the Crusader states become the Kingdom of Cyprus. Of course, the unit roster kind of changes a little bit. And then Armenia in Renaissance era becomes Kingdom of Georgia. And that unit roster is different, right? The Angevins, their unit roster shifts over time. So you've got the Armenian start position here. You've just got a tiny army, and then your economy is just horrible. And you have very few avenues of expansion, right? So actually the easiest avenue is to maybe, if you want to go the historical route, ally with the Ilkhanate, and then, take your pick. You have to fight a war. Perhaps you can go against the Crusaders and take Cyprus, and then, raid islands from there, be kind of a Kilikian pirates type faction. But, if you go against the Mamluks and try to attack Antioch, you're gonna, it's gonna be an extremely difficult campaign, even on medium settings. That's an extremely tough campaign. But yeah, this mod, Chivalry 2, I hope I was able to explain in this video why I like this mod so much. There's so much detail here that's missing in Vanilla Medieval 2. Unit rosters are expanded, I think, in a way better than the unit rosters in Stainless Steel. Actually, I always was a bigger fan of the Chivalry 2 unit rosters more than Stainless Steel, even though Stainless Steel units do look a little nicer. The graphics look a little bit nicer. The map might look a little bit nicer. But I actually always preferred this mod. I really like the era campaigns. I like that it added 5 era campaigns, right? So you've got early, Dark Ages, high, late, and Renaissance. I always thought that was so interesting. It was really unique to this mod. No other mod really did stuff like this. The Chivalry 1 style economy, really tough to manage. I really enjoyed it. A really huge challenge, especially in the early game. There are easier factions. Like I said, Byzantine early era campaign, that's an easy, medium difficulty kind of campaign, right? You need to put that on very hard. But a campaign like Principality of Akaya or Bulgaria in the early era, late era, Serbia in the early era, high era, Armenia in the late era, those campaigns are super tough. Angevins in the early era, those campaigns are super tough, super challenging, even for really experienced players who are experienced with this mod. So yeah, I hope I explained in this video. Just a couple reasons why I think Chivalry 2 is still worth a play in 2021. Why I really enjoy this mod and its campaigns. It's got a ton of replayability. It's got a ton of new factions. It's just deserving of your time, even in 2021 with a whole bunch of other amazing mods like stainless steel and its various submods. I still think this mod is worth your time. Again, it's a little bit more vanilla style in terms of the graphics, but if you can overlook that, Chivalry 2, one of my favorite mods of all time. Again, thank you to Lemos for re-uploading the mod to ModDB. Links in the description below. So let me know what you think of this mod in the comments. And if you'd like to see me stream or do a let's play of this mod, I still haven't had a chance to do that. I meant to do one last year, and I actually did have some episodes recorded of a Serbian campaign, but it didn't go very well, so that's why I didn't upload it. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like videos about the historical Total Wars and their mods, leave a like and consider subscribing. I cover all the historical Total Wars from the original Shogun, the original medieval, all the way to Three Kingdoms and beyond, and Rome Remastered, of course. So stay tuned for more Rome Remastered content as well. I will have some interesting tidbits for you coming up soon on Rome Remastered and its mods. So stay tuned. Keep your eyes on the channel. I'll see you in the next one.